Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 22nd, 2017. Time for another show. President continues to be as crazy as ever. We'll catch up on all of that. I saw an interesting picture of him. I guess he had a rally last night, which they don't appear to have the same sort of media drawing power that they used to. I mean, they covered it, of course, but that used to be an event that couldn't possibly take place without everybody in America becoming aware of it eventually. I only found out about it the next day. I knew he was going to do it. I saw no coverage of it. Well, so I count myself lucky. Perhaps you weren't so lucky. But we're going to render you all unlucky by discussing probably what went on there. What grabbed my attention was a picture, I think, from the rally last night. You can never tell because he wears the same clothes all the time, pretty much. But a picture in profile of the president, doing his blustering best to rouse the crowd and pointing out at them. And, of course, no one remembered to remind him that don't show your fingers in profile because everyone will see how short and stubby and stupid looking they are. And I guess he ignored the advice. I had to recaption the picture that The Hill had used to illustrate its story about Trump's attacks on wind power, because why not? I mean, how ironic is that, by the way, for Trump to be attacking the production of wind power? But pointing out at the audience, and it looks like he's holding some sort of orangey flesh color camouflaged stub-nosed revolver or something. I mean, his finger... We forget how tiny those stupid little fingers are. It's inconsequential, of course, in the grand scheme of things, and you're all being distracted by his finger length from the important substance of the day. Today being Thursday, it's the day that Mitch McConnell has set for officially, I guess, releasing the discussion draft text of the Republican tax cut bill, which is being disguised as a health care bill. It doesn't have anything to do with health care except that the money that is being set aside for the tax cuts is coming from things that we previously used to pay for health care for people in this country, and now we're not going to. So all the details are coming out, and in most ways it turns out to be as terrible as everyone imagined. But for some reason, today is the day that we have chosen on the Democratic side of the aisle to scourge ourselves and punish ourselves and insist that we have been distracted from this important story by either, a certain faction wants us to believe that we have been distracted from the important story of health care, which we've been discussing since forever, by either the insane fixation on Russia, which doesn't appear to me to be all that insane, or some other, I don't know, you pick you get your choice depending on your faction. What have we been distracted from the healthcare story by? So let's see what other candidates are out there. Well, we'll try and figure it out and get the latest on it. The early indications are that there's about 350 articles that we have to get through. I've got something like in the order of 20, 30 something messages, excerpts and links from Greg, so I'm sure he's excited to get started, in the sense that he can't wait to tell you the bad news about these things. I know. It's a bit of a downer as we start these things. And, of course, today being the day after the summer solstice, I need to remind you, it's all downhill from here. Less sunlight daily. It's like the sun is shrinking in the face of either Russia or healthcare or name your favorite distraction, I guess. I don't know. I've had enough of these stories telling me I'm so distracted from everything. I feel like we cover a lot of things, and we certainly leave a lot of things aside. Certainly the guys on the after show have to bat cleanup for us all the time. But anyway, we're ready to go. Daily Kos Radio is live. Bill knows that, all the way up in Portland, Maine. So we must be extremely loud on our speakers that we stick out the window today. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, reveals the GOP health bill includes 10% of off all lizard spleen tinctures. It's got an old-fashioned approach to medicine that, we haven't seen since the days of, I don't know, the Black Plague. Well, what's old is new again, I guess. Let's see, another thing riling people up, and I think correctly, we'll have to take a stop somewhere along the line. I bet this is somewhere among Greg's articles. I guess part of Trump's remarks yesterday, he brought a lot of rich people, I guess, along with him to his rally. I'm not even sure why that would have happened. We'll take a look at the reporting on it to try and clear up exactly what's going on. But he brought, he at least made mention of Wilbur Ross, the billionaire who he made Secretary of Commerce, and Gary Cohn, who's formerly president of Goldman Sachs, who does, I don't know, something about it around there. He's like the electrician in the White House or something like that. I don't know. He does something. Anyway, pointing out at some point during his speech that it was really brilliant of him. His true brilliance as a leader is that he knows that bringing rich people in to run the government is a smart thing to do, because you don't want poor people in charge of the economy because they're stupid. I mean, if they were smart, they would be rich. So, duh. You don't want to have poor people doing these things. Rich people know how to become rich, and so they'll be in charge of the economy, and that's all of you. So you'll all be rich somehow, eventually, because rich people are running the economy. Of course, the exact opposite usually proves to be true. They're rich because they have figured out ways to sucker poor people into giving them what little money they've got, and if you add it all together, then it's enough to make one person rich if they hold all the money. And if you don't want to change that as economic policy, well, then you're the kind of guy we need here at the Trump White House, because I'm one of those guys and I want to keep all the money. Bill reminds me that talking about all the distractions distracting me is in itself a distraction, and I need to focus. That is true, although I must also point out that me reading tweets about talking about all the distractions distracting me itself being a distraction is itself a distraction. So no more tweets about my focus, please, unless you need to. Well, I mean, I guess you could tweet me and let me know that my focus on the need for focus is a distraction. That's also a problem. And see, this never ends. That's one of the difficulties about it. We'll also, I guess we could take some time out to note that alongside what's a distraction, the next most favorite pastime for Democrats and allied analysts is trying to decide who's to blame for XYZ. You name it. Who's to blame for the failure to win an overwhelmingly Republican district in Georgia's 6th yesterday? Who is to blame for your being distracted by either the distractions or the discussion about the distractions themselves? Or who is to blame for any of the problems that we have, including not already being in control of every single thing that there is? It's been a bad day for Nancy Pelosi, not in any real sense, but in the sense that she's been catching flack from professional Nancy Pelosi bashers, many of whom I'm sure would prefer to see themselves at the helm of the Democratic Party. Some for good reason, some for not so good reason, but that seems to be sort of a recurring theme as well. I'm not really certain what would prompt it, objectively speaking, but it's a repeating theme nonetheless. I say I'm not really sure what would prompt it, and what I mean is I can't think of any really particularly good reason why it should be happening, but there are reasons for it, and we know what those reasons are. We may or may not dive into them. I don't want to become distracted, basically, from telling you what the other various distractions out there are. All right. Armando wants to let us know that he has a few thoughts on Pelosi. I'm not certain. If I want them. We'll see. We'll have to find out what they are first. We have to vote to let you in to find out what's in your bill/mind before we do it. But you're in danger, of course, of wandering immediately into misogyny. So take a few minutes and reflect on these things. It's time for us to bring Greg Dworkin in. Greg had an enormous number of messages sent through today. It must be, is there some kind of news or something happening today?
Yeah, well, it's all about the healthcare bill that's supposedly going to be released today in the Senate, but won't necessarily be the actual thing they vote on next week.
That is true. Yeah, well, we spent a long time discussing that yesterday. Now, you're all up to date on what sorts of procedural tricks they could use, well, at least generally speaking, to continue to hide the bill from us. But this one, it doesn't feel like it's not what they're proposing because it seems terrible, so it meets that expectation.
It's going to be terrible in the end. Maybe we can just jump right to that, but I did want to just briefly touch on some other things, because if we get involved with the health thing, we'll never finish, and I won't do anything else. So, and that's fine. But I did want to mention that the intel chiefs, according to CNN, are telling investigators Trump suggested that they refute collusion with Russians. They felt very uncomfortable about it, but didn't feel pressured.
Right. So what they felt was bloating and gas.
And so Admiral Mike Rogers felt obligated to write a sternly worded memo to himself about what happened, not as detailed as the Comey one.
Because he didn't feel pressured.
And Dan Coates didn't write a memo, because I don't know that he does those sorts of things.
Oh, he may not be a memo guy. What that means...
Yeah, he might have been a bill guy, he's out of Congress, but...
They felt pressured.
Not a memo guy.
And but they want to keep their jobs. If you felt pressured and you don't care about staying, you say you
They weren't
felt
told
pressured.
to intervene.
Right.
So it wasn't the smoking gun that Nixon had. And they said that the reason they didn't want to say this publicly is they hadn't been advised by the White House on whether or not executive privilege was going to be invoked. This is like the dumbest thing in the world.
Yeah.
It applies to the president, not to the people who work for him. And the president invokes it, not them.
Right.
And yet they were claiming this new thing that someday Trump might want them not to have said what they did, therefore in advance they won't.
Rather convoluted. This White House has a real strange identity problem, but they tend to, the entire staff tend to ascribe to themselves the entire powers of the presidency itself and just say, well, I'm pretty sure the president will back me in it, because that's sort of his habit. When he wants to throw his weight around, and he's decided that somebody who works for him has been dissed in some way, then if you did that to them, then you did it to me, and I'm the president, and I'm going to come down on you. So this is sort of an extension of that. There's a million different manifestations of that. But,
right. And then there's two sort of media interactions with Trump that I think are worth mentioning before we segue into the health stuff, because actually the segue is part of that.
Okay.
But on the one hand,
Sounds
you
like
had Jim Acosta from CNN, I believe it was Acosta, who basically said this whole idea of what they're doing here with these briefings with no cameras and no recordings is BS, and it's ridiculous. And yet they still go. And I think there's going to be another one with Sarah Huckabee Sanders tomorrow.
Oh, is it tomorrow? Okay.
Or today, I'm not sure, but no recordings and no cameras. And the question, of course, is why they still go. And Jay Rosen had a note about that, he said, listen, the reason they do it is because they're not worried that the media is going to misinterpret them. They're just going to bypass you altogether. They don't need you.
Okay.
And I think that there's a number of reporters who just have not wrapped their heads around that.
Well, that would be difficult. Your
reason for being doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And but we don't want to accept that.
And you've been working your whole professional life to get to this point, because this is supposedly the most important
this is the
reporter in. You're the most important reporter your organization has got. That's why they gave you the job.
Right.
And now you're not.
And now you're not. And what you do doesn't really, in the end, count for much. And you should know that.
So
and they don't. And it's hard for them to accept. So they don't go there.
Well, that is tough. I could see why you'd want to build a defense mechanism for that.
Yeah. So Chris Hayes writes, last night was a perfect illustration of why the Republicans are plunging ahead with the ACA repeal.
Okay.
Even though it's wildly unpopular. I think the Republicans have been much quicker to understand the contours of extreme polarization in this era than the Democrats have. The bet the GOP is placing is that the engine of politics is fundamentally cultural resentment of these people, the other team.
Okay.
That's not necessarily racist per se. It could be rural versus urban. yes, there's racism mixed in, but you know, there's my editing, not editorializing, not Christopher Hayes. But you know, the whole idea that our tribe is better than your tribe, you can lose the contours of what is it about the other tribe that we don't like. I mean, it could be abortion, it could be guns, it doesn't have to be race. But the point is, it's my tribe versus your tribe, and that is the most important thing. That's just a fancy way of saying Trump not only ran his election focusing on his base, he governs focusing on his base, which is a little unusual. Usually after you get elected, you try to be the president for everybody. He's not even trying. So the bet the GOP is placing is that the engine of politics is fundamentally cultural resentment of these people and those people and the other people. And that power overcomes other forms of political gravity. So you have the signature domestic policy initiative, which is wildly unpopular. So unpopular, Republicans in contested special elections won't defend or talk about it, like Jan Forty or Handel. But it doesn't matter. The bet is that cultural resentment and bottomless supply of super PAC dollars and a little bit of gerrymandering and geography are enough to govern from. And that's all he's doing. And that's all he's going to do. And to expect him to do other than that is crazy. And so when he has his rally in Iowa and looks crazy, in air quotes, bunny quotes, he's not. He's talking to his base. We think he's crazy because we think his base is crazy. But they hear what they want to hear. He's fighting for us. And, he's going to do all these great things. And a lot of the stuff that he said is completely insane and absolutely untrue. But it doesn't matter.
Oh.
One of the things he says, is that he wants, like for commerce, he wants cabinet members who are rich. He likes poor people, but he wants rich people in those positions, meaning that they'll probably understand it better. And he tells his base that, and they say, yeah, great, fine, whatever you want to do. We don't really care. We're not even listening to you. You are taking it to the libtards. That's all we care about.
Pretty much. I mean, he spent the previous set of rallies, which we call the election campaign, telling everybody, of course, that it was horrible and disgusting and corrupt, that if you were to be so foolish as to elect Hillary Clinton, she would put all these rich people and Wall Streeters and Goldman Sachs types into government. And now, of course, he's returning to say, here are my rich people, Wall Street types, and Goldman Sachs people that I've brought into government. Isn't that great? We're going to use that to help all you poor people, who I like very much. Just stay there, stay where you are, stay poor. Know that I like you a whole lot, and I'm going to do some great things for you. And that was enough for them. That was terrific. And then they did a lock her up cheer, and everyone went home happy.
Right. And so, don't look for old governing principles here. There aren't going to be any. There are never going to be any.
Lock her up, bird, actually. Yeah, no, none in the offing. By the way,
he's not going to become president.
Along the way, when you mentioned that ordinarily, right, the thing you expect people to do is they get elected by their base, but then they're president for the entire country. That's what Democrats are supposed to do. Republicans, what we like to, as a sport, we elect Republicans and then say they have to do that, and then they don't do that, and everybody scratches their head and says, that's weird, they're not doing it. All right, well, let's do it a different way instead. I mean, that was always, the line that was used when George W. Bush won. Well, now he'll have to tack to the center and show they can govern and be the president for everyone and compassionate conservative. And, of course, the operations were run by Karl Rove, who said, no, opposite, actually.
You know, what you're saying is true. And part of my frustration with media all along is for some reason they can't bring themselves to say it. Right. And that's why Norm Ornstein and Thomas Mann were so revolutionary a couple of years ago when they said that this isn't both sides. Let's just say it. One side is the radical.
Yeah. And then Norm Ornstein went from like the congressional oracle that
expert
both sides
to like nobody wants to talk to him.
Yeah, that's weird. That guy has like 6,000 people following him on Twitter. So a weirdo, a blogger. And that was the end of Norm Ornstein. I mean, he's still there. I appreciate it.
He's still there. He still knows everything he knows, but nobody wants him on TV anymore.
Yeah, it is an odd thing.
Yeah. Anyway, so what's really happening? Well, opposition to the American Health Care Act, AHCA, Trumpcare, has doubled among GOP voters since April.
Gee.
So it's gone from 16% opposition to 30% opposition, and that's not even knowing what's in it. Once they know what's in it, it's going to go even higher. So it's a very, very thin, rickety construct that they've done for themselves, and they're betting that this is going to sustain them. I think they're going to fail. We'll see how that goes.
It will take a while.
The healthcare bill rushes forward in secret, says the Washington Post. The media mostly shrugged. This is a piece by Margaret Sullivan.
Oh.
And basically the problem is this whole thing about doing it in secret, doing it against norms, the typical, hypocrisy that everybody says both sides is in Washington. Remember when the Democrats were secretive about Obamacare? No, not really, because that didn't happen. That was a talking point. Whereas the Republicans are actually doing it. But the reporters shrug their shoulders and say, both sides, fine, well and good. You kind of expect that. What's interesting is that because it's in secret, there's nothing to show with a camera. And
right.
Because there's nothing to show with a camera, it doesn't make it onto cable and TV.
That's true. And even if there was something to show, it would be pages of things. And
it's not that interesting visually, and so they don't cover it. That's very different than a Trump rally.
Right.
They can cover that because it's all visual.
Yeah. Cheap and easy.
Stunned or not, it gives NBC's reporting team an opportunity to report on what's known of the bill and how quickly the vote is approaching. That was Democratic lawmakers pretending to go looking for the bill. One result of the lack of intense coverage is difficulty mobilizing citizen resistance, wrote congressional reporter Jeff Stein of Vox, who's been keeping the pressure on. In one recent story, he quoted a New Orleans organizer, Joyce Vancine, talking about the difficulty of getting people motivated when so little is known. It's like trying to tackle a football player made of air. How do you do that without falling on your face? So NBC's paid the most attention. Outlets are starting to pay attention now. As of today, with the release of the bill, they'll have something so they can hold up a piece of paper and say, look, so you're going to get a little bit more coverage. And so, it's going to peak or start to come to a head today with the vote next week. Now, you covered the part about ignoring the parliamentarian.
We certainly have brought it up in the past, yeah.
There's a roll call article today.
Oh, yes,
GOP might buck Senate rules to pass healthcare overhaul. Parliamentarian decision still pending. But essentially what they're saying is they'll let the committee chairs decide whether or not it fits the Byrd rule, not the parliamentarian.
Yeah, I got that article from you yesterday. It was a post-show, but essentially, no surprise here. It's a roll call article that says the things we warned you about possibly happening that would be terrible are happening.
Yeah, final decision on the score rests with the Majority Senate Budget Committee chairman. It just has to be within reason, said Enzi, a Republican from Wyoming.
And that's
a spokesman for the budget previously told roll call the chairman has reviewed the House-passed legislation and found it's satisfactory, and that's good enough.
Okay.
We'll see.
It's not.
What we have talked about is that both the abortion language, which is to say trying to defund Planned Parenthood, and various state waivers for essential health benefits and for basically paying for pre-existing conditions might not pass the Byrd rule because it's extraneous and isn't really directly related to federal budget expenditures. That is to say, it might put more burden on the states, but that's got nothing to do with the feds, and therefore is against the Byrd rule. And we expect that as well. And so there'll be lots of workarounds about how you do that. But nobody should lose sight of what's actually happening, what's really happening, and that is that what's being proposed and what's coming out today, quick summary here, a discussion draft circulating Wednesday afternoon among aides and lobbyists would roll back the ACA's taxes,
yes,
phase down Medicaid expansion, rejigger some subsidies, give states wider latitude in opting out of its regulations, and eliminate federal funding for Planned Parenthood. But by cutting back Medicaid expansion and in future trying to cap Medicaid altogether, as somebody noted, this isn't really an attack on the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. It's an attack on the Great Society. And what they're trying to do is actually rip up the social safety net so that they could pay for more tax breaks for the rich. And that's what it is, and that's how it has to be looked at.
Well, I'm prepared.
So
that I've not been
we'll see how it's covered in the press.
Yes. Well, it'd be
Oh, and by the way, in the process of doing that, they're going to make your insurance a whole lot more expensive. For example, what's going to come out of this, Topher Spiro notes, average deductible for a silver plan is currently $7,474, the deductible. Under the Senate bill, it's going to increase to $10,464.
Okay. Yes.
It's going to cover 75% costs on average now with Obamacare, and it's going to the new bill is going to lower what is covered to about 58%. So your deductibles are going to increase, and out-of-pocket expenses are going to increase tremendously.
Okay.
Like 68% increase for those things. So the whole idea of focusing on lowering premiums when in fact your total costs are going to go up is insane, and people are going to figure that out. And ultimately, I just don't understand how the Republicans are going to be able to get away with this. That not in the sense of being able to vote for it. They have the majority, and whoever has the gavel gets to rule. But the public already hates it. When they find out what's in it, they're going to hate it more.
Yeah.
And this is not going to be solved by a rally in Iowa with Trump blathering about how he likes the rich.
Well, no, that probably won't solve it. But hey, who cares, essentially? I don't know. I'm not
Well,
certain
nothing
how it will
matters.
work.
Well,
Yeah,
I still think it does.
I hope so. Maybe what they're banking on is for a certain segment of Trump's base, for the blue collar / wish I was blue collar because I've been unemployed for forever because there's no jobs in my town set. I guess medically bankrupt is medically bankrupt. It doesn't matter how bankrupt you are. I owe $1 million in medical bills instead of 100,000. Still medically bankrupt, so nothing's really changed. So net zero for me. Everything was terrible before. It's also terrible now.
Right,
so,
and I'm so confident of this, I'm never going to have a town hall again.
Yeah, I guess so. If your balance is at less than zero, it doesn't really matter how much further down it goes. So we might as well medically bankrupt those people big time and tell them that it was the Democrats. That's ultimately somewhere. I'm waiting to what I guess you really want to reveal at some point is what is it about the plan that makes Republicans think that once this happens, they'll be able to blame Democrats for it and have people believe it?
I don't get that. So here's Axios with some of the highlights. Subsidies would still be available to help people buy health insurance.
Oh, great. I'll go get
But FPL, which is the federal poverty level.
Yes.
Right now, you get subsidies if you're between 100% and 400% of the federal poverty level. They want to lower that to 350.
Okay. I mean, on the surface, that probably doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, they want to cover less people.
Yeah.
It'll have a 4-year reinsurance program to help state insurance markets, though it might have to be passed separately. The cost-sharing reduction subsidies
that would
be funded through 2019, so that'll make the insurance companies happy. That'll help stabilize the market. That may get challenged on the Senate floor, though, because conservatives don't like the idea of paying for anything.
True.
States would get to waive some of the ACA's insurance regs through beefed-up version of the law's Section 1332 waivers. Pre-existing condition protections and coverage for young adults up to age 26 couldn't be waived, but the ability to pay for it might well be.
Oh, okay. So, and that's a hugely popular one that we haven't talked much about, keeping your kids on the insurance. You can keep them, it just costs $1 million.
Yeah, you keep them, you just can't afford to pay for them.
Yeah, great.
Older customers could be charged 5 times as much as young adults compared to 3 times now. So if you're older, your rates are going up. By the way, those are the Trump
high
voters.
Prices, though, so it's a good thing.
Those are the Trump voters.
All right.
Medicaid expansion will be phased out more slowly than in the House bill, ending the expansion in 2024. But Medicaid will still have per capita caps, tighter spending limits than the House bill, so Medicaid gets cut by a lot.
Are we sure about the phase out? I mean, that's
still
clearly
being
what
argued.
that says. I just want to sort of raise this red flag, as I've seen some reporting this morning that says the last couple of weeks have been that moderates, quote unquote moderates in the Senate were holding out instead of phasing out the Medicaid expansion instead of doing it immediately, they wanted to phase out, and then there was the 3-year thing floated, and then it was
versus the 7-year thing.
Yes, Collins types were pushing for 7 years, and then I read this morning that they basically settled on 3. So, nice negotiation there, moderates. Well done. That was the starting point. You actually gained nothing.
Okay, then unlimited opportunity to amend it during the budget process on the floor. Unlimited meaning within the time frame that they have.
Yeah, right. Good luck. Well,
So it's not really unlimited.
right,
But
like the unlimited ability you still have to pay
the unlimited
for your
ability to
pre-existing
say, I
conditions.
proposed an amendment that would have fixed my problem and it was voted down, so I'm voting for it anyway.
Right. Oh, well, but okay. But I tried. That is to say, I was present.
So all, again, until you see the actual language, a lot of stuff has been floating around. What's interesting is some of the stuff that's been floating around in the Washington Post about the difficulty of getting this done. And there's still, according to the Washington Post as of this morning, McConnell doesn't have the 50 votes yet. Not to say that he won't get there. But one of the things that he's threatening to do is bring it to the floor. We talked about this. Is bring it to the floor whether it has the votes or not.
Yes.
And the question is that because he wants to get it done and out of the way, which is what some people are reporting, or is that just one of his strong arm tactics to put pressure on the Republicans to vote yes? Which, of course, it is.
Maybe both.
Maybe both. There's no reason why it
it's a
can't be
win-win.
both.
I don't care if
But the key part about that to me is he doesn't have the 50 votes yet.
Yeah, that makes it exciting.
So
It's a
we shall
contest.
see. We shall see. It's again, I don't understand how Collins can go back and justify this. If you're going to rip up the safety net in order to give lots of dollars to rich people who don't need it, I don't know how you go back to your constituents and justify it. And by the way, mental health and opioid addiction issues remain enormous, and this does nothing to fix it. I didn't see anything about the special fund that Shelley Moore Capito and Rob Portman in Ohio want, because they know if you take this coverage away, you can't get addiction services.
Right.
So they wanted a special fund. You should probably call it a special underfunded, because every time they do one of these funds, there's never enough money in it
Right, sure.
to accomplish what you want. That's the whole thing with risk pools. Risk pools, in theory, are great, but in practice, nobody ever puts enough money in it to cover the costs, so therefore it doesn't work.
A tradition going all the way back to Superfund.
Yeah, exactly. So the same thing is going to be happening here, and that being the case, are they going to vote for it anyway, even though they didn't get what they wanted?
Yes.
Probably. I don't know. We'll see. Now, once it passes next week, it then goes to the House passes it, and then they leave.
Okay. Well,
And
that's
then
it
what's
for
happened is, in very
process.
quiet terms, with very few people talking about it, the entire social safety net is ripped up. And then they discover it later. And that's not going to go over well. It's already not going over well.
Yeah. Well, I saw that some of the hope is that they've designed the things such that the most disastrous impacts don't become apparent until much, much later. A lot of the phase-out ideas, or sometimes phase-out is a cover for, well, I'm trying to do it gently. That makes me moderate. It also means I'm trying to do it, either so that it impacts after my next election or after I've retired or whatever. It's somebody else's problem. You won't notice it in terms of an immediate collapse of the healthcare market. So everything will be good. And then that'll give us time to think of how it's Democrats' fault.
Right. So Brian Beutler's writing about this in the New Republic, and he's saying, how did it get to the point where they get to do all of this stuff and nobody's saying anything about it?
I don't know.
Josh Marshall says, well, it's because Democrats and liberals are too literal.
Oh.
This sounds awful, but I haven't seen the language, so I got to be careful about overstating and overhyping what's going on.
No, you don't.
When in fact, the whole problem is that they're cutting the safety net in order to give tax cuts to the rich. Why don't you just say that? That's Josh
right.
Marshall's diagnosis.
Oh, I see. All right. Well, let's take a look at that one. Or this is
I
being
just
referred
added
to
it at the end so you can
in
find it.
Brian's piece.
Yeah.
All right.
For the reasons spelled out, I think this misdiagnosis is the source of the challenge and the solution. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell didn't lock down the bill writing process in order to block liberals from going over the bill with a fine-tooth comb. His chief insight was in recognizing a bias, not among liberals, but within the news industry, toward what you might call new news. Things we didn't know before but do know now. It's that bias, more than anything else, that's brought us to the brink of living under a law that almost nobody on the planet has seen, but that will uninsure millions to pay for millionaire tax cuts. Basically, it's not new because we've been talking about this off and on in pieces, so what's the cover? Okay.
I got you.
He says, the reason the Affordable Care Act debate was so thoroughly covered 8 years ago wasn't the reporters who covered it were better, but then the debate was like the Sutter's Mill of news. Reporters had hearings, drafts, amendments, CBO reports, speeches, symposia, votes, and the stories commanded prime media real estate. Democrats didn't try to pass their reform agenda through the filibuster-proof budget process. They needed 60 votes. There were exactly 60 Democratic senators at the time. That was before Scott Brown. Every single senator was a kingmaker and a newsmaker, and any Democrat who had a change of heart about anything was in the news.
Yes.
Right? That's what makes Republican denunciations of the debate over Obamacare, he writes, so outrageously dishonest. While Republicans faked hysteria over the supposed secrecy, what McConnell recognized about the 2009 debate is that all of the Democrats' struggles and setbacks was from its openness. It wasn't Democrats who set the template for Trump care. What Republicans are doing now is a through-the-looking-glass adoption of the lies they told about Obamacare.
That does sound familiar.
Right? All of this underscores the importance of treating the coming bill text, the stuff we get today, and next week's CBO analysis as if they were vaguely written letters from James Comey. They'll be mere days, if not hours, to distill the contents and effects of the secret bill to the public before senators can cast their final votes. But it would be better in the long run for the news industry to migrate toward a more nuanced standard of newsworthiness. It doesn't cede all agenda-setting power to people who can commandeer front pages with misleading information just because it's new or escape scrutiny when they want to, simply by going dark. And that, again, raises the whole issue about what's the point of this news conference, because nobody who speaks for the president can speak for the president. No news is created there. And so why do you even have them?
I don't know, although
it's all part of the whole thing about how they govern. They just do what they please.
Yes. Well, that I think is the bottom line of it. Because I'll point out that my recollection, I'm so old, I remember the 2016 presidential campaign, and I remember it being a tremendous issue somehow among the... Wait,
let me guess. That Hillary Clinton hadn't had a press conference.
Right, exactly. And they were creating news.
Hey, I'm old too. I remembered it.
Isn't that strange? That's weird.
I can't remember your name now, but I remembered that.
Yeah. That's about all I remember. And they had countdown clocks or count up clocks, I guess. And it's been X number of days since she had and I mean,
they should have a countdown clock for when's the last time Trump said anything that was true.
Well, we don't have, that's not something you can use. No, do they
just put the countdown clock in the corner. CNN's really good at that.
I guess they could put anything they want.
Oh, well, restart the clock. He got his name right. All right, let's restart it.
Meh. You don't know he didn't. People will chime in. They'll be tweeting us that his name's really Drumpf, and how dare you?
Fake news.
Well, this is an essential problem. I guess Brian could find a way of arguing that actually fits the pattern in the sense that they were so hungry for new news that they just invented it about Hillary Clinton. But I don't know. And I mean, maybe that was part of the competition between the reporters covering the Clinton campaign and reporters covering the Trump one, and the Trump guys constantly had new stuff, and the Hillary Clinton faction was starved for it, so they invented a story about how they were being starved. Maybe that works to figure it out. I don't know, but it's an interesting contradiction, to be sure.
Joan McCarter, who was just on the show yesterday, just put up a post at Daily Kos, which helps here. Senate Republicans set to reveal Trump care, tax cuts for the rich, Medicaid destroyed.
Oh, yeah, well, all right, so the headline has done it.
We have.
Oh, yes,
Let's see what the New York Times, Washington Post, and everybody else does with it.
I'm astonished anew every minute about Donald Trump's face is amazing. I just can't believe what he does with it, and he gets captured in these awful poses. Everybody, eventually gets a bad picture. But every picture of him, he's contorting his face.
You really have to give props to Alec Baldwin, who captured that very well.
But Brian Beutler's piece, by the way, illustrated by a gigantic close-up of Mitch McConnell, which is itself absurd, and he's hiding all of his teeth with his lips, so he looks toothless. But
far from it.
Yeah, a little bit like maybe like a sea worm of some sort, perhaps I would say, rather than a turtle. But everyone has bad pictures, but there's no good pictures of Trump.
Right. So I'm looking at the front page of the Washington Post right now. Their big story, Senate Republicans to unveil healthcare bill as GOP struggles to advance its vision, talking about the fact that McConnell's not quite at 50 votes yet.
Okay.
Piece by Sean Sullivan, Juliet Alpern, and Paige Winfield Cunningham. That leads off. The next one is a healthcare bill, secrecy in the Republicans' apparent case of amnesia, since they can't remember openness in the Obama version of it. That's the part we were talking about there, and Brian Beutler summarized very well. The next one is Wonk Blog, the simple reason the Senate has been keeping its healthcare plan a secret. They can't pass it otherwise. And then at the bottom, they are already starting their counter. This is always fun. If more than 3 Senate Republicans vote no, the latest version of healthcare reform will fail. Opposed or leaning no, 0. Have concerns, 11. Right. Unknown or unclear, 41.
I guess
it's the funniest thing to look at that. Basically, nobody knows what the F is going on here.
Yeah.
So I am not saying that I am guaranteeing you this is going to pass because McConnell's a genius. This may fail. It's so bad that despite all the machinations and all the careful planning, it sucks so much that some of them might not be able to vote for it.
Yeah. I mean, that is true. It's hard to believe because it's always been the case. Generally speaking, the normal case is you don't bring anything to the floor unless you're pretty sure you've got your votes for it. Very rarely do you risk it.
Yeah, otherwise you pull it. That's what happened the first time around with Paul Ryan's health care bill.
But things are not normal now, and we have to realize that, and it's not entirely the case that there's always some space between the majority leader and Congress, even if they're of the same party, and the president or even the leadership in the House. They all have their own agendas, so it's impossible to know always. But generally speaking, you don't want to bring a bill to the floor, draw attention to it, and have it not happen. But who knows? Wow.
Yeah, again, as we talked about, in this case, this might possibly be the one time where McConnell's serious about it and will bring it regardless, because if it fails, he's done and then he can move on. It's interesting because some of the fixes in here, if it weren't for getting rid of Medicaid, and if it weren't for not paying for things, and if it weren't for the tax cuts, might be the core of something that Democrats could actually work with.
What?
Right? I mean, if you said, look, there are problems with some people, older Americans, or a group of people, even if it's 7 to 10% of the population and not 75, like you'd get the impression, who are having issues in regard to the premiums going up and really being priced out of the situation, and the very real situation here with insurance companies pulling out of markets and leaving counties with one or less insurance companies to cover. Those are real problems. And so if that's the core of what you're trying to do, which is to say not repeal the Affordable Care Act, but rather to fix it, you'd find that there would be some Democrats who'd be willing to talk to you about it. It's all the other extraneous stuff that they insist on putting in that makes it impossible to work with Republicans.
Well, yeah. Okay.
So what I'm saying is if McConnell brings it and it fails, in the past, John Boehner would do something like that in order to get it done with Democratic votes because it was the only way he could control his radical group within the party. They're not willing to do that anymore. They should, because it's the best way to get back to actual governance. And what if McConnell says, look, I'm going to do it? Just a thought.
Okay. I
mean, it's not without precedent. Boehner did it.
True. And now he's gone.
Now he's gone, but, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And then they get to talk about the debt ceiling.
I guess so. McConnell won't go anywhere. So
McConnell's not going anywhere. He was just reelected, so he can afford to do it.
I guess that's true. And then that puts them in a different position. Although I don't think...
and don't forget, the whole thing here is that he wrote the bill.
Yes. He knows what's in it.
Blame him.
All right, I will.
Maybe he's doing that on purpose.
Could be. And that's actually got an interesting parallel in there that to the Nancy Pelosi story, where on the other side, her offering herself up as the lightning rod to take the heat for Democratic positions, while McConnell sets himself up to take the heat for Republican positions. All the heat is going there, and the senators, other than occasionally telling members of the press that they're uncomfortable with the process. They're appreciative of his lightning rod role.
Right.
And on
So,
the other side,
he
not
might
so much.
actually be taking that on for the good of the party and the country. Who knows?
Yeah. Meanwhile,
But that's only if it fails.
We're angry about our lightning rod and want to get rid of her. Or so I
Or
say.
something.
People near me on the spectrum.
I'm not even paying attention to that argument at the moment. It's kind of
Okay,
silly.
well-
I think really right now that is a true distraction.
I can't analyze that.
Of all the distractions of distractions
yeah.
and focuses and stuff like that, that's a true distraction.
You're
The
right.
real issue right now is what's going on with this healthcare bill.
That would be a most unfortunate distraction. And although there may be real issues buried underneath,
I'm
it,
sure
I
there
don't
are
know if
next
there
week.
are.
Let's
But,
deal with this
yes.
week.
Okay, that one.
The other
I'm
thing
willing to
that's
talk
interesting about that
distraction.
distraction, I think, by the way,
still on
which,
it.
again, at my advanced age I have to bring up, is that a lot of it is a generational issue.
Okay,
Okay? The younger backbenchers are getting a little restive because all the old guys are running stuff.
that's true. But that's
And,
always true.
they're allowed to be annoyed about that.
Yes, it keeps our party vital. Well, that's the thought. That's
Right.
the theory of it. I don't know whether that's really what's driving them. Probably not.
It'd be nice if the people you suggest replacing the old people actually have some skills.
Yes, skills
Nancy
that come
Pelosi
with age and
is very,
experience.
very good at what she does.
She is.
If she says she's got, 217 votes, she's got 217 votes exactly.
Yeah, pretty much.
And knows which three others can go and say, okay, I'm voting no for principle. Which is to say, because my constituency demands it. She's
Yeah.
great at that.
Well,
She got stuff passed. The reason that we have an Affordable Care Act is her,
okay.
arguably.
I won't argue against it, so that makes it arguable, I guess.
Right? If she wasn't as good as what she did, we wouldn't.
Very likely not. It was a close call from the beginning.
Right.
House less.
Again,
so.
contrast her with Boehner and with Ryan.
Okay, I will.
She's
They're
better.
terrible.
Better at what she does. So, fine, whatever. Come up with somebody else, we'll vote and we'll see what happens. Last time that happened, she won. So that's what happens,
Yeah.
You can be disappointed that you lost. We are, for example, on Tuesday. You can be a Bernie voter and disappointed you didn't win the primary. You can be disappointed that you didn't win leadership elections. But there's a winner and a loser, and that's why we have the elections.
Oh.
You don't like it, then reorganize and do it again next time. Maybe you'll win. Kind of heartless, huh?
Yeah.
I lost, therefore you should listen to everything I say. And do it my way, because I lost.
That's one way to look at it, and it's the way they look at it. Why should
Well,
we be listening?
not all of them. Some people do. And
That
it's,
is
you
true.
scratch your head and say, that's very nice, here. Why don't you complain about it on Twitter while everybody else gets down to, the real issue here is what's going on with healthcare.
Yes. Well, it usually hits a lot of the more dedicated activists. It hits them at some point that the choice is either to come back at us or to lay down your arms in frustration and walk away. And which
You go back
look
to
like
just
the
yelling at
other guys were
Chris
right.
Matthews on TV. I mean,
Yeah.
if that's what you want to do.
So what you need
But
to do
that's
is
not gonna
motivate
get you
people to the point where they say, I'm not going to let you be right about this. Okay, well, that's not necessarily the greatest, most purest motivation in the world, but it serves, it keeps you active, so good.
Right now,
I'll
the
be willing to
Republicans are
do
trying
that.
to get rid of the safety net and get rid of health care for millions of people, upwards of 20 or more, in order to give tax cuts to the rich. That's the issue on the table. If you're focusing on anything else, it's a waste of time.
It shouldn't
Or
be hard.
it's a premature thing to do. Do it next week.
I feel almost certain that Bernie Sanders could sign on to that position.
Yeah.
Oh, he did every day. Oh, that's
yeah,
true.
Pretty much. All right. Anyway, that's my roundup for today. Thanks so much for listening. A little of this, a little of that, but it'll be quite interesting to see what the language is. Don't get caught up in the language. The basic principle we already know.
Yes.
Get rid of the safety net, tax cuts for the rich. Don't get distracted by 400 versus 350% FPL and other things that may or may not be okay with the parliamentarian. The bigger issue is they're trying to get rid of the safety net so that the rich can have tax cuts. With that, this is Greg Dworkin signing off. David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. It's his show, and he'll take you for the rest of the hour. And he'll be here tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday.
Yeah, something like that.
Something
Anyway.
like that.
We'll have to work that out. It won't affect you, though. We'll see you on Monday.
Okay, take care.
All right. Fine. You do the same. Not sure how I'm going to be able to handle tomorrow just yet. I know I won't be able to be on the air live, and my hope is that I can record a new show because there's so much going on. Sometimes I really actually enjoy the ability to record the next day's show immediately, because there's so much I didn't get to towards the end of the broadcasting day, and I say, I'm running out of time, and I could get to this and this and this, and I can use the Friday show for that. I just hope I can actually squeeze that work in before I run out of time, like for real. Like it becomes 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. I do have some hard deadlines to deal with still. All right, let's see, Armando. I know you had something to say about the issue, which is too much of a distraction. So you can, in other words, Greg told us it was a distraction to focus on the Pelosi thing. You could come on the show and tell us why that's wrong, although you probably don't actually believe that's wrong. You just have those thoughts about Pelosi. Yeah, certainly willing to entertain some of those before we move on to the other subjects, or even in the middle of moving on to those other subjects. By the way, let's see, along the way, I did see the note from our fellow listener Boswood, who you can find on Twitter as Bosen Good, Bosen, Bosen Good, Good, tweeting at the mere mention of Norm Ornstein. Was able to pull up this piece, this diary from Daily Kos from Bethesda 1971, and dated September 18th, 2016. It's about Norm Ornstein. Norm Ornstein, Twitter hero and last hope for journalism. That sounds interesting. I bet he'd like to claim that mantle. Norm Ornstein here, I guess, is it a Twitter conversation that's going on, or a Washington Post piece by Chris Cillizza in which the exchange is recorded here? Norm Ornstein to Chris Cillizza, September 16th, 2016, on media pathology, which we've just been discussing. Chris, I hate to say it, but I find your response incredibly weak. I'm not sure what he's responding to, but let's look what this has to say. The media's need to go on the web immediately. The new world of traditional print journalism has its own pathologies built into it. I see increasing and troubling evidence, less in the Post than in others, of a rush to get stories out there because of the demand for eyeballs and clicks, fewer safeguards at the managing editor, and below, less tolerance of criticism. Okay, so I guess is that Cillizza noting Ornstein's criticism of his previously made point in this column. Onto that's just sort of a grab quote up at the top of the diary piece, and then it launches into who is Norm Ornstein. Most of you probably know the name. Should we go into the background? Norm Ornstein is a respected political scientist and contributing writer for The Atlantic. He's the only non-conservative fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, which includes otherwise nutty conservatives like Jonah Goldberg, Ramesh Ponaru, and Charles Murray. He's also a hero, a prominent voice pushing back against the worst of false equivalence, but more importantly, a voice so respected that it would damage the town to hear it. Do you remember that old Simpsons episode? Okay. A voice so respected that people at the Times and the Washington Post listen and respond. Most left voices are often preaching to the choir and don't reach them, but Ornstein knows these people. They care what he thinks. In 2012, and to a large extent continuing today, Norm was blacklisted from Sunday shows and other mainstream media. See below. We will. Norm took to Twitter, and primarily in that capacity is proving to be a hero, not just for the remnants of respectable journalists, but for sane anti-Trump people. But I repeat myself. The blacklisting of Norm discussed here that until 2012 he was a frequent guest on Sunday and other talk shows, the go-to guy for smart analysis, regarded as a centrist. But after spending years observing the nihilist tactics of Republicans, he and Thomas Mann wrote, "It's even worse than it looks. How the American constitutional system collided with the new politics of extremism." At about the same time as the book's release, they wrote in an article in the Washington Post called, "Let's Just Say It, Republicans Are the Problem." The book and the article told it like it is. And by setting forth a scathing indictment of the capture of the GOP by far-right extremists and lunatics. The article begins, Representative Allen West, or perhaps Republican Allen West in Don Trump Jr.'s parlance, since he gave his excuse for that stupid tweet yesterday. Representative Allen West, he is a representative, a Florida Republican, so now we know what rep means, was recently captured on video asserting that there are 78 to 81 Democrats in Congress who are members of the Communist Party. Of course, it's not unusual for some renegade lawmaker from either side of the aisle to say something outrageous. What made West's comment, right out of the McCarthyite playbook of the 50s, so striking was the almost complete lack of condemnation from Republican congressional leaders or other majority party figures, including the remaining presidential candidates. It's not that the GOP leadership agrees with West. It's that such extreme remarks and views are now taken for granted. Immediately after that article and book, Norm was able to sleep late every Sunday because he was blacklisted on the Sunday shows. The networks just could not have the centrist, credible, respected Ornstein telling the truth about Republicans, because if you do it, then you won't have any guests. I mean, take a look every Sunday, really, honestly. And speaking of media biases and various habits of theirs that are hard to break, why does it happen for Republicans and not Democrats? In other words, how come they can't get enough of you on the television for some reason, right? You are secure in your Sunday spot if you are a Democrat basher. If you are a Democratic Democrat basher, forget about it. You'll never sleep again. You're the new Lieberman. Even the liberal XYZ person says Democrats are wrong about this, that, and the other thing. You can get a job as a Fox News Democrat, for instance. But you can't stay on the air being hey, Republicans are actually much worse kind of person. You can be a Democrat who says the Republicans are terrible. That's expected. Every once in a while they need one of those. But I guess it's no mystery if you look at the lineup of the shows, and if you certainly those of you who have followed Bill in Portland, Maine's commentary about it. I mean, it's a running comment thing for him. How many of every Sunday's lineups are conservatives or conservative-leaning people, and how few of them are Democrats. I see him mentioning it all the time, and I see lots of you mentioning it all the time, and it's a constant truth. Sunday shows are dominated by conservatives, and if you have somebody that says, if you've got a book out and that your governing thesis for all of your analysis is, but not only both sides, blah, 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 that's not only is that sometimes true, but in the main, it's a misleading meme. It's another distraction. That's right. You can always find something wrong with both sides. The question is, what about the order of magnitude of the wrongness? And there's something spectacularly more or of higher magnitudes, higher levels of magnitudes of wrongness going on with Republicans than with Democrats. And of course, if a Democrat says that, well, you're just biased. And because he wasn't a Republican, they had to assume that he's basically a Democrat then. He's not a centrist or whatever, but he can't be thought of as being fair if he's saying that one side is worse, even though that's true and therefore fair to say so. We can't have that. And the majority of our guests being Republicans, that only compounds the problem. We absolutely can't entertain having him on the air because the majority of our guests will be upset about that and will have a fundamental problem with appearing with or dealing with him. And what are we going to do if we lose? If it was really half and half, it would still be troublesome. If there were really 50% Republicans and 50% Democrats on the show, you'd lose 50% of your panels, and that would be a bad thing. But if there are 75% of your panels, then you absolutely can't have it. And by contrast, I guess that means if you're going to have guests on that come on and say that Democrats are fundamentally the problem, one, you would only lose 25% of your panel there anyway. And two, it's also well known, I think, among producers that Democrats don't sit things like this out. Well, I need to get there and represent my side and give our side of the story and speak to our base, and somebody's got to be there. And well, I mean, that might even be true, but I don't know. For some reason, Democrats get stuck in that role. And I don't know, maybe that's part of the thing too. Maybe that's part of the power play there. If you are the only Democrat on the panel and you're suddenly faced with the idea that I'm going to be facing stacked odds, and they're going to have someone that they bill as an independent expert on the air telling all the listeners that really I'm 10 times worse than all the other people put together, do I go on the air? And I guess if you say, well, otherwise you'll just leave the floor to them. You don't even have backup, right? If you said that to one of the Republicans could object and say, I don't want to be party to this if the shoe were on the other foot. And there would still be two other Republicans available to represent the conservative viewpoint. Whereas I guess if the one Democrat backs out, that's that. Although I doubt very much whether it comes to that level of analysis. It's probably more along the lines of, well, then I won't be seen on television. And that's just objectively bad. So I'll go. And I'll fight my fight, but it won't do any good. But what do I care? I'll get my television time. I don't know. Maybe nobody ever thinks about these things and it's all in my head. But I don't know. There's an awful lot of writing that seems to agree with it. Okay, let's see. So where were we here? We left off with how Norm ended up blacklisted. And then a third portion of the diary here. Norm's Twitter offensive. Norm is a must retweet now these days on Twitter. Here are some recent examples. Let's see. Some examples then current were his September 13th, 2016 tweets saying, I don't know if I have seen a more embarrassing piece this campaign than, this one particular writer on false balance. See Jonathan Chait in his New York Magazine article here. I don't know what that, I think he's trying to say that this particular example was terrible and that Jonathan Chait did a good job with it, but I can't tell. And then others also from around the same time period saying this is an embarrassment for Face the Nation. It's striking how Kellyanne Conway manages to get away with serial lies. The perfect campaign manager. Sounds familiar. Rents saying, if you don't support a racist, xenophobe, unfit to be commander-in-chief, you will pay a heavy price. This headline is shameful. Bill Clinton aides used tax dollars to subsidize foundation private email support. That one coming from Politico. And cable news, get rid of campaign apologists, spinners, 9-person panels, coverage of empty podium. So, is he having an effect? Well, on Saturday, the Times had a banner headline saying Trump lied about birtherism and reported that he continued to lie about it during about its origins with Hillary Clinton. Some thought today's talk shows, with notable exceptions like Christie lying to Tapper's face without consequence, were a little bit better. I think Norm's contributed to that. Still, calcified, corrupt media is a tough nut to crack, and maybe there's nothing that can be done if the suits are just ratings whores who are willing to risk sacrificing the country to their bottom line. But Norm is trying, and some are listening. Whether they change at all, that's still to be seen. Let's see. Norm engages, part 4 here. Norm engages with the Times and Washington Post. Will it make a difference? And I guess this is where the exchange up at the top came from. We had Silitza agreeing to publish an email dialogue that they had. Silitza starting off by saying in this excerpt, I fundamentally disagree with the idea that Trump has received a different sort and better sort of coverage. I actually think some elements of the media have been overly critical of Trump because they cannot believe that someone with Trump's views and approach has become one of the two party nominees. There is disdain and a dismissiveness bordering on elitism in some parts of the media directed toward Trump. And again, when it comes to your references to Bannon and others, we wrote all about Bannon's background and his controversial statements, I guess at the Washington Post. That it didn't change people's minds about Trump isn't really the media's responsibility. We just don't have that power. Ornstein then returns with, Chris, I hate to say it, but I find your responses incredibly weak. You remember that? Yes, Her performance as Secretary of State is good, perhaps the best indicator of how she would govern. Clinton, obviously. And somehow you and your colleagues in the media have decided that the emails and the Clinton Foundation are the be-all and end-all of her judgment and the indication of how she would govern. Not how she ran the State Department, how she structured and dealt with the team of people around her, how she interacted with the president, the secretaries of defense, the national security advisors, the DNI, etc. Not what she accomplished and did not accomplish, not her judgments on policy or other leaders. I should add, not all of those stories would be flattering or laudatory. I don't have the time or resources, to count up the column inches since the nominations were decided that have been devoted to email and the foundation compared to other issues above, but I would wager that the ratio is, as they say, huge. The Post has been better than most of its competitors, but as I recall, even you, for example, bit on the ridiculous AP story making something sinister out of the meeting with Mohammed Yunus. The need to go on the web immediately. The new world of traditional print journalism has its own pathologies built into it. Next, he and Roger Cohen, a Times op-ed writer, had a Twitter dialogue on September 4th, storified for your amusement. A sample that exchange, Cohen saying, whatever we may think of Trump, and I think I've made clear what I think, Hillary's got big issues. Ornstein replying, Roger, this is not about ignoring these issues. It's about obsessing on them to the exclusion of everything else. I'm not so sure Roger got the message. Our diarist writes in an article, after the dialogue about economically anxious Kentucky Trump voters, Cohen wrote, Trump may win in part because of the liberal intellectual arrogance that dismisses the economic, social, and cultural problems his rise has underscored. Yeah, okay. Well, it goes on from there, and there's not that much more, obviously, to it. You'll, if you're reading along, you'll see that I'm not skipping too much. But I think we've got the point largely of Norm Ornstein and his dismissal from polite circles where they make a practice of allowing 3 Republican liars to say whatever they want alongside one. Well, we gave the Democratic liars one slot, you see. It occurred to me, actually, as I was reading through it and reading the description or Ornstein's complaint about how Clinton was covered, and I realized, of course, that there would be a lot of Bernie supporters during the primaries who likewise felt much of the same sentiment and who thought, well, but those are real problems and there are real issues, and there certainly were issues to be examined there, and I don't think Ornstein's trying to deny that. Of course, he's saying, well, I think he's essentially arguing that those were distractions from the bigger question of, one, are those really indicative of how she would govern substantively? Though it is fair to say that raises questions about her style of governance. That's true, and they're real. But the substance and policy content of her governance isn't really addressed by focusing on those issues. But I wonder whether there weren't journalists who said, well, we're being heavily critical of Trump, and that's realistic and fair because he's horribly unqualified for the job. And in addition to being unqualified for the job, he's just unqualified for participation in polite discussion of anything under our ordinary norms. He's the kind, you lock him in the basement. If he was your uncle during Thanksgiving, you don't let him to the table. He's just nuts, and you can't have that in polite society, or whatever passes for polite society these days. But I wonder whether they were trying. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that they were trying to compensate for that kind of bad press by saying, well, then we have to give some bad press to the Democrat too, I guess. And maybe that was it. But maybe why the emails and the foundation in particular? Why would that be the bad press that they chose to focus on, as opposed to, say, legitimate criticism of the job she had done as Secretary of State or as Senator? Surely there were things that you could find that you could pick on and stay on and remain on task in terms of examining the substance of her record. And perhaps, I wonder whether there was any feeling, either any discussion of it openly or just sort of in the back of people's minds, the journalists' minds, that, well, if we focus on the emails and the foundation, one, that's more current than her record as Secretary of State or as Senator. And there's certainly a bias towards currency, and that's part of what Brian Boiler was talking about. But there's probably also the bias towards finding a comfort zone with members of both parties or people on either side politically. I remain more or less neutral and objective as a journalist if I can find things about which I can criticize Clinton and get agreement that those are important issues from both Republicans and Democrats. And at the time you could find that because there were, of course, Republicans were interested in criticizing anything they could about her, so they were happy enough to latch onto that. And there was a significant number of Democrats, in part because of their support perhaps for Bernie Sanders and their interest in seeing him win the primary, and other people just believe that this was true regardless, that there was a significant cohort of current Democrats who likewise would say, yes, it's a legitimate area of concern and inquiry, and we should be focusing on it. Partly because it will help my candidate possibly win the primaries, and partly because this will obviously become an issue in the general election campaign, no matter who wins the Republican nomination. It just happened to set up very nicely and allow for the media to say, I must be hitting the sweet spot here. Even the liberal XYZ from the liberal faction says this is an important issue and I ought to be focusing on it. How do you resist that as a member of the media looking to stay in that supposed neutral space in between the parties? That seems to me like a guarantee of safe passage. It's the safest thing in the world you could do would be to criticize her on her emails and the foundation, because you could find both Democratic and Republican defenders for doing so, and prominent ones at that, not just fringies. So there was that. I mean, I guess you could argue about what's fringy and what isn't, but I think we'd piss off too many people to bother to do that. I don't know. I think there's a kernel of truth to that, and I guess I'll have to leave it to the journalism analysts to really drill down if there's anything of interest in that theory. Let's see. What have we here? Here's a comment from, I can say this on the air because we're talking about chickens. Left-leaning cock. And he knows exactly what he's doing. Commenting on Twitter, if Trump isn't allowing an open press briefing, can we all pretend we're there? How would they prove that you weren't? That's another good question too, right? You're not only are you up to this point allowed to say whatever you want about the contents of the supposed Republican health care bill because it wasn't public, and even now we're not even certain that the draft they're going to give us today is actually reflective of what they intend to offer at the end of this process. Then I guess, yeah, you could also claim to be there. They don't know that you're not. Although they probably have some record of it. Not that they would disclose any of it. They no longer give out visitor logs at the Republican White House. So, Now, I guess you could just claim that anybody's going, too. Right? Vladimir Putin was at the White House today secretly plotting his next moves with Donald Trump. We don't know that that's the case because we can't see the visitor logs, but we don't know that it isn't the case because we can't see the visitor logs. So, huge opportunity there. Why doesn't the media capitalize on that? Now you've got fresh news to report, i.e. whatever you feel like reporting. Doesn't matter. Can't find sources to confirm it? Doesn't matter. Real sources don't exist. You're not allowed to look at the visitor logs, so you might as well make the most of it. All right. Let's see. Other items up for bids today. Let's see. Armando, if you really did want to talk about Pelosi and distract us from the important stuff, I will entertain the possibility. But if not, I'll move on to these other subjects. Oh, you know what we could do if you're actually, well, I'll talk to you about it later, but if you're free later in the day today, we could even have that discussion via Skype when I'm not on the air. And then tomorrow it'll sound like, you get what I'm talking about? We're going to tape a show for Friday, but we could actually have guests in a pre-taped show. Wow, that's like what most other podcasts do. I've just invented the podcast, everybody. Exciting stuff. We're all going to be billionaires. Trump distracted you, Armando. Trump distracted you from the important distraction of talking about Pelosi. I cannot, I can't say I'm surprised. Let's see. I will move on to some of the other, stuff here. I mean, we did heavily cover the healthcare thing. Really, we need to take the day off of the discussion, except to say today's the day they're going to release the draft. But, we've already warned you about what it's likely to have in it and how it could possibly change before the whole thing is done anyway. So, let's go on to to point out some other stuff here. Let's see. One thing I want to get on the record, I don't know how much I want to discuss it. I never really did get around to talking all at length about Sebastian Gorka, and I think we probably have to return to it because I shied away from it because by the time he was back in the news, word was that he was being dismissed from his position at the White House. So I didn't talk about it as much. I had hoped to discuss Gorka before he became a critical issue. And then I think he survived that purge, and he may still be at the White House. So maybe we get another turn at examining just how horrible he is. Let's put this on the record from the Daily Beast. Maybe you've seen this one. This is just another notch, I guess, in the case against him. But it won't do anything. Did you know that the FBI had fired Sebastian Gorka at some point? I don't think he was working for the FBI directly. I think he was doing consulting stuff with them. And this is the way Gorka sort of made his it's not really a fortune, but he made his living for a good amount of time in the last couple of years, being sort of consulting with law enforcement agencies who would have to deal they were preparing to deal on the front lines, if necessary, with combating terrorism here in the United States. And it made sense for various law enforcement organizations to start preparing for that possibility. And an easy way to do it among the administrative brass would be to say, well, why don't we pay somebody X thousands of dollars to come and speak to all of our cops? We'll give them a seminar on either what to look for or what motivates the average wacko terrorist, as if they had any idea. And we'll give our street cops a general overview of what they're dealing with here. And it gets pitched to you by people like Sebastian Gorka, who would then take a fee for coming and speaking to your cops. But all it really was an excuse to, well, one, to get paid, and two, to come and give an anti-Muslim diatribe and get paid for it. That was his business model. And I guess the FBI got taken in on it, at least to some extent, back in the day, and then got fed up with it. Spencer Ackerman, writing this piece for the Daily Beast, FBI fired Sebastian Gorka for anti-Muslim diatribes. That's where I got the word diatribes from. Trump confidant Sebastian Gorka was taking money from the FBI and declaring that the fight against Islamic radicals was a holy war on our side, too. What a fun way to get paid. The inflammatory pundit Sebastian Gorka worked for the FBI while he was a paid consultant to Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. That's how recent this was. Lecturing bureau employees on counterterrorism issues. That was the ostensible reason for having him there at all. Well, we work in counterterrorism. Let's have a speaker on counterterrorism issues. Rather than have somebody who knows what they're talking about and costs $50,000, let's have somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, who costs less. And that would be Gorka, I guess. Until the FBI terminated Gorka, of course, for his over-the-top Islamophobic rhetoric. The Daily Beast has learned that the FBI ended its contract with Gorka just months before he joined the White House as a senior advisor to President Trump. Law enforcement officials attending an August 2016 lecture from Gorka, can you believe having to do that, whose academic credentials and affiliation with a pro-Nazi group have been recently revealed and have come under fire, were disturbed to hear a diatribe against Muslims passed off as instruction on the fundamentals of counterterrorism. He's been at this a long time, by the way, and this has been a cottage industry that he and like others, like is Frank Gaffney, is that right? Did he engage in the same sort of thing? There was a good half dozen, probably more, at lower levels, a good half dozen like top level premium guys who made a living speaking to law enforcement for decades. From the George W. Bush administration on, all these law enforcement agencies knew they needed someone to talk about counterterrorism, and that was all there was out there, because these guys did the most promotional work, and the price was right, but all they did was come in and say how bad Muslims were, and everybody got ripped off. It's a huge waste of money. Anyway, law enforcement officials attending that thing were apparently disturbed to hear this diatribe. Gorka told attendees at the Joint Terrorism Operations course, an introductory level class for participants in the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, that all Muslims adhere to Sharia law, which he said is in conflict with the U.S. Constitution and American democratic values. Officials familiar with his lecture said Gorka taught law enforcement officials there is no such thing as mainstream Muslims, only those radicalized and soon to be radicalized. The following month, a senior FBI official assured outraged and embarrassed colleagues that the Bureau would no longer use Gorka for any subsequent lectures or instructions, according to documents reviewed by the Daily Beast. Now, the article does go on at some length, and I definitely recommend it to you. I'm not going to go all the way through it because it's not a Gorka examination period on the show at the moment, but just it's interesting to know about Gorka himself, and it's really I'm sure that the rest of the balance of the article will reveal just how long and deep the roots of this practice are. If it doesn't, we'll have to come back to that one of these days and bring up all the old articles about how this used to go on. But I mean, the FBI, it was a little risky to do that there with the FBI, and all he risked was having the contract terminated, and that's not such a bad thing because he was about to move into a White House position. But this was something that you could do all the time, full time, anywhere you wanted. I mean, the Peoria Police Department had just as much interest in having counterterrorism presentations given. Every police department in America, the state police in every state, there were state bureaus of investigation that needed it. Mayberry PD needed it. Whoever, or what did they with Mayberry RFP, right? Is that right? Or I don't remember. What was it? I never watched it. The show was on in reruns when I was a kid. I never had any interest in Andy Griffith. But anyway, the point is you could do this anywhere, and they did, and they made a bundle doing it, and all it was basically at bottom, it was just a huge scam. But of course, they thought they were somehow helping a cause here. And the whole scam was I'm just a nut blogger who hates Muslims, and there were plenty of them. And hey, I could make a much better living than I'm making now by telling police departments, and there's thousands of them, that I'll speak to their cops about counterterrorism. And all you do is you come in and you scream about how Muslims are terrible. And in some cases, like with the FBI, there's a responsible leadership that would be embarrassed by these things and a whole political process to sort out whether you did the right thing or the wrong thing. And they do sort it out, and they say, hey, that's wrong. We want to terminate his contract. But in other levels, at other departments, the politics of it are either that, hey, I hate Muslims too, and so that's great, or I'm embarrassed and all, but I mean, all we did was hire him for a one-time speech, and I might have to answer questions possibly about it at the city council. But other than that, there's no real pushback on my having done this. I can just say, if I get called out, you just say, well, it was a bad decision. True, but I mean, you shouldn't fire me over it. We just won't hire him again. In the meantime, though, how many times did this happen with either no pushback or even worse, receptive police departments who are either, I mean, you know how police departments tend to be staffed and run. They tend to be, generally speaking, right-leaning in almost every instance. And so for some of them, it was just feeding the beast. And, at best, it would, from their perspective, it would become official it would become a reason to officially sanction police department policy in that mold, and to deliberately teach their police department that there really is no such thing as a moderate Muslim, that they're all radicalized, that Sharia is all over. I mean, we see why we have this problem now with anti-Sharia protests going on. Sharia is not an issue anywhere, ever. But we still have these protests going on. And by the way, if you go and you counter-protest them, gee whiz, it's so strange. I got arrested for counter-protesting, whereas the protesters protesting against the non-existent problem of creeping Sharia had no difficulties whatsoever. In addition to which, by the way, more and more we're finding that the protesters against Sharia are showing up visibly armed and wearing makeshift homemade armor in anticipation of violent conflicts with counter-protesters, at which they fully expected the local police local constabulary to arrest the counter-protesters. Well, they're anti-fascist protesters and they're violent. It's them, the ones who are starting all this stuff. I've come to this thing with a club and a 2x4 with a nail in it and a motorcycle helmet and homemade armor, but you should arrest them. Or by the way, showing up as an oath keeper with an AR-15 over your shoulder saying you're here to provide security for the people in armor. And somehow it's the people who show up with signs that say give peace a chance on the other side, or occasionally, yes, violent anti-fascists. There are such people. But they would all find themselves arrested, and not so much on the other side with the people with the weaponry and the armor. And gee whiz, maybe it has something to do with the fact that the police department was right-leaning to begin with, and B, was instructed that there is in fact a huge menace from creeping Sharia, and true patriots are the ones who come out to protest it, even if they happen to come out in homemade armor to do it. What an odd situation that is. We should be looking further into that. And we'll have to I guess we could promise you that for a Friday show, but that would require more research. But you should be aware of this practice and that it's actually got a long history and dates all the way back to the George W. Bush administration, as far as I know. And who knows, maybe even further back beyond that. Armando, throwing out another name, Steve Emerson. That one doesn't ring a bell for me. But Steve Emerson had the market cornered for years on terrorism consulting, and he was a fraud too. So another name to look up, a homework assignment for the rest of you. I wanted to jump back into Pocket and take the daily tour of what I have put aside in the last 24 hours and what I've missed along the way, discussing in previous days. Let's see. Yes, there was the very important piece in Roll Call about the procedural issues surrounding the healthcare bill, though I may set that one aside for further discussion later on. Let me see if the lead couple paragraphs or so will help sum up the situation. Greg mentioned it. GOP might buck Senate rules to pass healthcare overhaul. Let's see if we can get a sense of exactly what they're talking about. Parliamentarian decision still pending on the House bill compliance with reconciliation. We knew about this. But they came up with some sort of, they were floating an alternative method of clearing things for the floor, which was sort of a new one on me. Republicans appear ready to make small but significant change to historic Senate procedure in order to advance their legislation to rework U.S. health insurance system, a move that could have notable impact on the future of the chamber's operations, as any rule change might do. Republican leaders are sending signals that if necessary, they plan to invoke a seldom used rule, so seldom that I've never heard of it being used, included in the Congressional Budget Act, which would make immediate problem correctly, I think, in Armando's eyes, that would allow Senate Budget Chairman Michael Enzi to skirt a decision from the chamber's parliamentarian, a key gatekeeper for the budget maneuver known as reconciliation that Republicans are using to advance their health insurance measure. Such a decision would have ripple effects far beyond the tenure of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a careful practitioner of the chamber's procedural rules. I don't know about that. And open the door for future leaders to more easily advance legislation under a 51-vote threshold. Of course, they could just nuke the filibuster and that would do it. But all right. It is the parliamentarian's office that determines whether or not a reconciliation bill is in compliance with the rules of the Senate. This is not a function of the chairman of the Budget Committee, said, you may know this guy, Senator Bernie Sanders, the ranking member on the budget panel. By the way, you can thank the Senate Democratic Caucus for giving him that position. Of course, all establishment Democrats hate Bernie Sanders and don't trust him with anything. He's just magically become ranking member on the budget panel. Said that's what he said in a floor speech this month. I don't know if it caught fire with any of you. I am extremely concerned that the chairman of the Budget Committee, in an unprecedented manner, appears to have made the determination himself with regard to the Trump-Ryan health care bill. The Senate could vote as early as next week on the health measure. Reconciliation, of course, permits the legislation to pass the Senate with only a simple majority of members supporting it. We know the mechanism why. So that, not quite accurate, but okay. But the bill must also comply with a set of chamber rules governing the process. Congress set up this process earlier this year when it passed the fiscal year 2017 budget resolution. That measure included reconciliation instructions that laid out the requirements any bill must meet in order to advance under the simple majority threshold. In this case, that was $1 billion in deficit savings over 10 years from the provisions in the legislation under the jurisdiction of 4 committees: the House Ways and Means Committee, the House Energy and Commerce Committees, and those committees did meet and mark up those bills, and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and Finance Committees, and those committees have not. I note, but no one else seems to be noting. Under ongoing debate with the Senate parliamentarian is whether the House bill would actually achieve the required savings under the HELP Committee. The Senate parliamentarian has yet to make a formal decision on the matter. Democrats argue that a provision to repeal the 2010 healthcare law's cost-sharing subsidies falls within the jurisdiction of the Finance Panel. Republicans have yet to formally submit an argument to the parliamentarian outlining why they believe this section that would end those payments should be considered under HELP's purview. One senior Democratic aide said. I don't know that it matters since neither of them have met, but okay. The GOP is expected to submit that argument on Wednesday. That would have been yesterday, a senior Republican aide said, and a decision by the parliamentarian is expected to come before the Senate votes on the measure. A spokesman for the Senate Budget Committee did not respond to a formal request for comment. The jurisdiction in this case is critical. If the parliamentarian was to side with Democrats in her decision, then the House bill as a whole may not comply with the fiscal 2017 reconciliation instructions. How about the case that neither committee reported anything? Unless they, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's possible that somewhere they used some other procedure to quote unquote report something, but they certainly didn't use regular procedure by meeting and having a markup and voting on a report. But, maybe I've missed something in all this. But at least they're looking at if the door's open to considering whether they've handled jurisdiction properly, then I guess the door's open for my questions. It's just that nobody's asking them. While the Senate is writing its own bill, supposedly, McConnell must first introduce the House measure on the floor to file a substitute amendment to it with the new language. If the House bill were deemed to be non-compliant, however, then the Republicans would need the standard 60 votes instead of 51 to advance it, a likely impossible task given no Democrats are expected to support it. But Republicans appear ready to invoke a section of the Congressional Budget Act that they say would effectively give the Senate budget chairman authority to determine whether the legislation meets the required deficit reduction levels. Final decision on the score rests with the majority Senate Budget Committee chairman, but it has to be within reason. I can't just pick a number out. Enzi, a Republican from Wyoming, told Roll Call. A spokesman for the budget panel previously told Roll Call that the chairman has reviewed the House-passed legislation and found that it satisfies the instructions for both the HELP Committee and the Finance Committee. And a senior GOP aide said compliance calls have been made repeatedly by budget chairmen over the years on matters inside and outside the reconciliation process. Such a move will almost surely fire up Democrats who, during the 2009-2010 debate over the Affordable Care Act, had to prove that their own health care legislation complied with the rules governing reconciliation. Fools that we were, we complied with the rules and nobody else is going to do it. It's sad when it comes to that. Interesting, though. I mean, so I guess I'll have to do some studying myself about those provisions and see what latitude the chairman really has to determine that it satisfies the instructions. I don't know I could see it being a close call on the numbers and giving some discretion to the budget committee chairperson because those rules were written in a day when it would be unseemly to lie too obviously about that stuff. And that's no longer necessarily operative. But I'd be surprised. I don't understand. What sort of language could there be in the Congressional Budget Act whereby a budget committee chairman could simply declare the two Senate committees to have reported something out that they didn't report? We'll have to dig further into that. But it can't be happening today, and it won't happen on the air. And it's not even easy to do off the air. There's no record of anything obvious that would substitute for standard reporting of these measures from the two Senate committees that's available publicly. So, I mean, it's just a matter of there's no record of anything, but that doesn't mean nothing exists. In this age, you can't tell. Anyway, let's see. Other interesting items for inclusion today. Oh, by the way, yesterday when we discussed the overwhelming heat in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Got some Twitter feedback on that one. And let's see, how shall we include all of these things? One was from Michael Musson, who pointed out that the story reminded him of an earlier story from back in 2012, I think, when a heat wave in the Washington, D.C. area so softened at least part of the tarmac surface at National Airport that one of the jets getting ready to take off taxiing to the runway got stuck in this soft spot in the tarmac and couldn't be pulled out. They had to go get heavier equipment to yank that thing out of there. It was just, it didn't shut down all air traffic of National Airport, but it's amazing. Nothing wrong with the weather or climate, though, by the way. Don't worry about things. And also received confirmation from our friend out in Hawaii, Judy Vincent, who says one of her sons is a pilot and says, yeah, that's just the basic truth. They got the article got it pretty much right. At a certain level of heat, each type of plane has its own maximum, I guess, threshold of atmospheric heat before it can't produce the lift it needs to take off on the runways that they've got. So all the science and avionics, is that an actual word or am I making that up? It all checks out anyway. It was true what we told you. It wasn't fake news. So good for us on that score. All right, let's see. What else can we hit as we head towards the end of the live show today? There's been a couple of things I have held off on because Trump has kept himself more or less out of this. By the way, I was wondering this morning, my thought, believe it or not, upon waking up, when I'm waking up in the fog and trying to sort out my thoughts for the day. But it struck me that we really haven't had much in the way of epic Donald Trump tweet storms to poke fun at or poke holes in of late. And it occurred to me that this more or less coincides with the arrival at the White House of Melania Trump and Barron. And it could be Barron's doing, I suppose. But I know for a long time we've made fun of the fact that Melania said, well, I didn't in particular, but lots of people made fun of, and I joined in it privately, I suppose. The poking fun at the idea that Melania was going to launch some sort of First Lady's initiative against online bullying when her husband was the biggest online bully there is. But maybe it's having an effect, or maybe it's just a matter of how shall we put it? We'll say tensions in the White House, perhaps, are relieved by the arrival of his wife. And okay, good for you. Maybe good for all of us. I suppose it's horrible to have to contemplate, but I wonder if having his wife there and just having that support system, to put the nicest possible spin on what might otherwise be a day-ruining image, has changed things. Maybe it's just a matter of he can't as easily get away with sitting on the couch and watching hours of television in the morning when she's around. She can distract him, ask him questions. Apparently they're spending lots of money on White House furnishings, and he loves reviewing that stuff. He actually is interested in decorating places. He's horrible at it, but he's interested in it. And maybe she can distract him from watching Fox and Friends by showing him fabric samples or different curtains, or let's talk about what furnishings we ought to bring in. Or maybe they're having breakfast together, and wouldn't that be nice? It'd be terrific if he was spending more time with his family, and I'm sure his youngest son would enjoy that. I hope that that's the case. I don't know. I have no proof of it, but it would be awfully nice if we were both getting less crazy tweets from the president and his son was getting attention. That'd be a great thing. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's all speculation, but it would be irresponsible not to. Now let's throw more curveballs at Trump and get back to bashing him. How about that? Look, here's a note from Ride the Curve listening along with us and saying, by the way, this air density thing with the planes happened the night SEAL Team 6 went after Osama bin Laden. The night air was so hot the helicopters couldn't lift. Wow. That's you would think that would be an issue in the Middle East, and frequently the case. Although where was he? He was in Pakistan, so it not really Middle East. But okay, it was very hot. Okay, we can acknowledge that much. Anyway, let's bring up a couple of these stories that have been waiting in pocket for a couple of days here. Which ones are the most important? Let's go with this one. This one might pique interest with Armando in particular, because there's got a legal bent to it. How about this? Campaign finance law. When collusion with a foreign government becomes a crime. I thought this was an interesting offering for those of us who have been following all the developments on the Trump-Russia front and the investigations, and are constantly being reminded that, you might not be able to necessarily come up with a crime to charge him with, at least in some of these things. A good reminder that maybe federal investigations aren't the end-all, be-all on this front. This, an entry from justsecurity.org, Bob Bauer, writing at this blog, Campaign Finance Law When Collusion with a Foreign Government Becomes a Crime. Commentary on Russian intervention, he says, in the 2016 elections has included one confidently expressed and perhaps growing view that there may be a scandal there, but no conceivable crime. Certainly Republicans like to repeat that one. It is claimed that the Trump campaign could wink and nod at Russian hacking and derive the full benefit, but that without considerably more evidence of direct involvement, there is no role for criminal law enforcement. And of course, Trump's doing everything in his power to try and plant the narrative, even if whether it's true or not. Well, you can't get me for this because I didn't do anything. I mean, I'm certain that he did very little. He usually does in anything that he's involved in. But he probably feels like he's probably being assured that what you did can't rise to the level of something you can be charged with under federal law. But federal law is not all there is. That's the point of this article. It's claimed that the Trump campaign could wink and nod at Russian hacking and derive the full benefit, but that without considerably more evidence of direct involvement, there is no role for criminal law enforcement. The matter is then left to Congress to consider whether new laws are needed, and the public, of course, will render its judgment in opinion polls and in elections still to come, sort of setting aside the questions of impeachment, etc. This view is flawed. It fails to consider the potential campaign finance violations as suggested by the facts so far known under existing law. Those violations are criminally enforceable. It would not be the first time Congress wrestled with these questions of foreign interference with the U.S. electoral politics, the U.S. electoral process. Following the 1996 elections, the Republican Party concluded that the victorious Bill Clinton had benefited from foreign intervention in his election. This probably rings a long-distant bell for many of you. Its Senate majority organized hearings, chaired by the late Senator Fred Thompson, who opened them with the declaration that high-level Chinese officials, remember this, had committed substantial sums of money to influence the presidential election. This was back in the days when Republicans cared about foreign influence of elections. They invented the topic. The ensuing investigation, which included a parallel criminal inquiry, did not live up to Senator Thompson's most dramatic claims, but Congress later amended the law to tighten the long-standing prohibition against foreign national spending in federal elections. On this point, there was bipartisan unity that the law should stand clearly and without gaping loopholes against foreign interference in American elections. Somehow we have forgotten this incident. It's very interesting. Then, the issue made a dramatic return in this last presidential election, but with a major difference. And I don't know what his difference is, but this time the difference is Republicans were doing it, and so therefore it was A-okay. It's okay if you are Republican. No, he says this time there is no doubt that a foreign state, Russia, devoted resources to influence the outcome of the 2016 election. That's true. In the last instance, in 1996, it was alleged by Senate Republicans to have been the case, but they never really came to any serious conclusions that were independently verified outside of the Senate true believers. Here, in this instance, we have the stated conclusion of several intelligence agencies that it did happen. It's just that Republicans don't care about it and think it was a good thing even if it did happen. So, okay. Unlike 1996, the manner of this intervention, the hacking of emails, the dissemination of fake news, has directed much of the legal discussion to computer security and espionage statutes. The controversy has not had the feel of a classic case about political spending. It has come across in press reporting and public discussion as a tale of 21st century cybercrime and foreign intelligence service skullduggery, more sophisticated international intrigue than Watergate's third-rate burglary and associated cover-up. Unlike the Watergate investigation, which began with a break-in, the New Yorker's and CNN's Jeffrey Toobin has written, it is not immediately clear what crimes may have been committed. And even if there might be criminal wrongdoing somewhere in this Trump campaign-Russia relationship, commentators have tended to doubt that there is yet sufficient hard evidence of it. Yet even on the information so far available, there are solid grounds for paying close attention to the potential campaign finance violations. We have forgotten about that. The case is more or less hiding in plain sight. And I guess this is where it becomes so exciting to find out that Robert Mueller is investigating possible financial wrongdoing and financial crimes. And it might be revealing too much to say it was campaign finance, or maybe it's not that. That's not what they're looking at. They may be looking at the money laundering aspects of it, but it might end up being related. Some of it may be that the cash they were laundering in the hopes of using it for campaign financing as well. But it could be completely separate from all of that. I don't know. The law, current law, the one that we're actually wondering, has it been broken? Well, if you look in the right section, campaign finance law, that law prohibits foreign nationals from providing anything of value in connection with an election. That's easy, or it certainly makes it pretty broad, right? The hacking of the Podesta emails, which were then transmitted to WikiLeaks for posting, clearly had value, and its connection to the election is not disputed. None other than the Republican nominee said so publicly, egging on the Russians to locate and publish Clinton emails to aid his campaign. Oh, I was just joking, of course, right? He famously declared, I will tell you this, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. One well-known Trump confidant, Roger Stone, is among those backing the president's candidacy who offered similar contemporaneous statements about the value placed on those disclosures, and who, having intimated that he had inside information about when the materials would be released, now faces inquiries from the Congress and from the special counsel's investigation. By the way, that's a rare double parentheses in that sentence. How about that? Roger Stone, who was among those backing the president's candidacy. I mean, again, I guess that's a weird construction because he's president now. He offered similar contemporaneous statements about the value placed on those disclosures, parentheses, and who, having intimated the inside information, yada, yada, now faces inquiries from the Congress, parens, and the special counsel, end parens, end parens. Okay, normally an editor would stop you from doing that, but it's a blog. There is a fair question of what sort of involvement beyond vocalized glee would subject Americans to liability for these foreign intelligence activities. The relevant regulation suggests that something more is required, at least substantial assistance to the foreign spender in providing this thing of value. Does a presidential campaign render this substantial assistance to a foreign national engaged in influencing an election by endorsing the specific activity and confirming its strategic utility? When the Federal Election Commission promulgated this ban on substantial assistance, it said little about its scope. It did make clear that the term was to be broadly construed. It offered the concrete example of a U.S. citizen acting as a conduit or intermediary for foreign spending, but noted that this was provided as only one example. It expressly left open other possibilities. The president and others associated with the campaign made no bones about the value to them of the purloined email communications. The president told a rally of supporters he loved WikiLeaks and read from the hacked communication to support his attack on his opponent for, quote, a degree of corruption at the highest levels of our government like nothing we have ever seen as a country before. He drew on the emails in the debates with Secretary Clinton. Notably, when he was asked during the debates to acknowledge the Russian program of interference and given the opportunity to openly oppose the actions, he wouldn't do so. He also mentioned WikiLeaks 124 times in the last month of the campaign. The Russians could only have been strengthened in the conviction that their efforts were welcome and had value. That covers the evidence in plain sight. Of course, investigators will examine whether there were Trump campaign communications or private assurances of two foreign nationals, including Russians and associates of WikiLeaks acting as their agents, to encourage them or help coordinate the dissemination of these materials. Coordination at this level could well trigger the application of other provisions of the rules directed at the political campaign's acceptance or receipt of the Russian assistance, or even its direct solicitation of it. But the substantial assistance prong would cover the more indirect of the Trump campaign's activities, including public statements that were conducted at more of a distance and yet still intended to signal the Russians that the help was needed and of value. A Trump defense may include the claim that he and his campaign cannot be constitutionally subjected to legal liability for any public statements on the campaign trail. They may try to frame their statements as rough and tumble political commentary on Russian behavior that, while helpful to the Republican nominee, neither Trump nor his associates clearly requested or for which they cannot be held responsible. This First Amendment defense is at least at the mercy of whatever facts are still uncovered about the extent of any collusion, but even with just a little more in the way of fact, with the addition of detail to an already well-established outline, the Trump campaign's position is precarious. How strongly does the First Amendment protect the presidential nominee's mobilization of a foreign government support for his candidacy, support achieved through illegal activities? A test of this constitutional defense is whether it relies somehow on the fact that Trump and his campaign were open and notorious in courting Russian assistance. Presumably, they had pursued this assistance behind closed doors, or had they pursued this assistance behind closed doors, few would question the legal significance of the understanding reached with a foreign government supporter. It would be remarkable to maintain that this appeal for help is converted into constitutionally protected speech because the speaker had chosen to have much or all of the conversation in public. Recent developments in the law speak clearly to the strength of the government's interest in an expansive enforcement of the ban on foreign national involvement in the U.S. elections. In 2012, in Blumen versus the Federal Election Commission, a federal appellate court ruled, and the Supreme Court affirmed, that lawful resident aliens had no First Amendment right to contribute to American candidates and political committees. More importantly, the court emphasized that foreign national political intervention implicated a principle fundamental to the definition of our national political community, which is that foreign citizens do not have a constitutional right to participate in, and thus may be excluded from, activities of democratic self-government. At stake was part of the sovereign's obligation to preserve the basic conception of a political community. It will be no minor feat for Trump's campaign lawyers, relying on Donald Trump's free speech rights, to overcome what the court called this foundational interest. The law was written, already treats speech as a factor in potential violations of the ban on foreign national political spending. A foreign national may not participate or control or direct decisions on contributions or expenditures. This is a speech-centered restriction. So a foreign national working for the foreign parent of a U.S. corporation, let alone a foreign national resident of the United States, may not discuss with an American PAC director plans for making contributions or expenditures, and it is immaterial for this purpose that the revenues on which the PAC will draw for the contribution was generated within the United States. And it is not only a question of the foreign national's speech, to which, of course, no First Amendment protection applies. The American PAC director's own speech is relevant to a finding of illegal participation if the conversation indicates that the PAC director is seeking permission, yielding control over the decision, or merely soliciting the foreign national's opinion on how to spend the money. A statement like Donald Trump's that he loves WikiLeaks, or that he hopes that more will be done to bring to light Clinton emails, would be evidence in such a conversation that his foreign national interlocutor was participating in a decision on political spending in connection with the election. Trump and his campaign might argue that the hacking and dissemination of the emails were not political spending, not in a technical sense contributions or expenditures covered by the campaign finance law. Perhaps so, but they were something of value, and the statute and related regulations of the FEC separately prohibit any value given by a foreign national. Of course, the Trump campaign might take up the fight on this issue and litigate it. It would then have the thankless task of persuading a court that a presidential candidate can invite, then warmly accept and exploit the activities of a foreign intelligence service because it is of a particular kind of value, not a conventional contribution or expenditure. The campaign will have an even harder time if it is established that Russians distributed information through online bots, the creation of DC leaks in the United States, or the payment for online advertising. There's much more here, and we're not going to be able to get all the way through it, but are you certainly getting the idea that there may in fact be the opportunity to charge Trump himself or Trump's campaign officials with actual violations of law. I don't know if it makes anybody feel worried or that it's somehow squishy stuff because it's campaign finance law. But on the other hand, I mean, traditionally we haven't really punished that in the same way. I mean, it has been sort of a disappointment, campaign finance law, given what could be being done with it. But it does give you an actual violation of law to latch onto and something to deal with. And it's also something that, believe it or not, as squishy as it is, the press understands and has dealt with it before. It might be an interesting entree into all of this, and it also may be an interesting entree, by the way, for other state-level law enforcement officials as well, because they have an interest in the conduct of the elections within their own borders, as well as federal campaign finance law. There's a lot more to dig through on this one. We'll be back. I hope maybe I can continue with this discussion in a taped Friday show. We'll be back live on Monday for sure. And in the meantime, let me assure you that Thursday is always a good day on the after show because it gets me to speak Italian. It's the Thank God It's Giovedì version of the show. Here's what they've got lined up. The EPA issues a warning about incense and scented candles causing asthma, while dismantling and delaying regulations on fossil fuels that cause asthma. I guess it depends what kind of asthma you got. Nothing says lifetime bans on lobbying by senior administration officials than more than a Trump appointee who has made almost $500,000 this year alone while lobbying for our pals in Saudi Arabia.
From Daily Kos Radio, on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More to come, of course. Senator Al Franken just wanted to ask Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke to answer one simple question, but all he got was stupid and ignorant nonsense instead. No surprise there. On the last half, reporting that the meanest, most radical faction of the Senate GOP got to decide what happens to poor people's health care, so they decided to kill it as quickly as possible. Coming up next.